Okay, so that was looking at the web services through CumulusGate, how we register a new account, and how we assign licenses. Now let's have a look at the .NET development side of things and how we access that license information through the .NET source code. Now the first thing you want to do is from the CumulusGate main page, click on the downloads button on the menu, and that'll take you down to the downloads area, and here you'll be able to have or get access to all of the downloadable content. Now the Nuget packages you don't have to download. There is a link to the Nuget page, but we can access that straight through Visual Studio, which is what we're going to do. There's also a VB.NET and a C# CumulusGate sample, excuse me, and a bunch of other stuff related to the Cumulus update services, which is another tutorial that you can find under the tutorials button. We'll also have a quick look first, before we look at those sample, the VB.NET and C# sample source solutions with detailed information. We're going to look at the minimal code implementation first, and then finally we'll look at the JavaScript libraries. Now I'm just going to expand the one that says view sample code implementation here. And for this example, we're going to do C#. I did for the Cumulus update services use VB.NET, so for this one we'll use the C# samples, but they're pretty much similar in nature really, so you can use either the C# or the VB.NET, of course. So this is the minimal code implementation, right? This is the minimum information you need to supply in order to retrieve information back, and I'm going to step you through that. So first thing we're going to do is to create a new project in C#, a desktop WinForms.NET application. So it's this one using the .NET framework. I'm using Visual Studio 2019 by the way, but 2017 should be fine as well. So be careful which one you use. We want to make sure it's .NET framework and not the WinForms app alone with .NET, because that'll be .NET Core. So what we want to do is make sure it's .NET framework. So let's go, click next, and we're going to call this one CumulusGate Demo 1, and we'll create that one. So it's using .NET Framework 4.8 here by default. It doesn't really matter. You can use whatever .NET Framework you want, as long as it's greater than, I think, 3.7 or something. The latest frameworks are obviously best, and it's compatible with that. Right, let's go to the Solution Explorer, and the first thing we want to do is select Manage Nuget Packages. Right, so once that pops up, we want to go to Browse, and we want to search for the CumulusGate packages. So once you select on that, it should be the only one that pops up when you type in CumulusGate. That might change in future, I guess, but you'll see it's the one with our logo. And it says Cloud-Based Licensing Service for Developers and End Users, and when you click on it, you should see that the author is BIMWorks Limited. The current version is 1.0.18, but that obviously might get updated in future also. All you need to do is to install that add-in or package, and if you want to, you can refer to the license information. It's also available on the website. I'll show you where that is. It's very small, so it takes only a few seconds to install, and once that's done, we can close this up, and we can just make sure that under references we see the CumulusGate services added, and there we go. So we're good to go. Let's first just create a little bit of some UI content here so we can actually do something, and we'll start off with a label and a text box. Alright, so let's change this label's text here, and we're just going to say we want the user to supply the username, and of course once that's done we want to have a password. Come on. Alright, and let's just make that a little bit bigger, and we're just going to copy and paste that below that section, and here we're going to say give us a password. So this will be the same credentials that your users would have used to register for the CumulusGate website, right? So this one is username, and then here we've got password, of course. So let's go to this one. Okie dokie, and we might want to add a password jar. I'm just going to use a star for now because I'm too lazy to search for the character, the one that's the little dot that I usually use, but that's good enough for now. It'll demonstrate, what we want to do in any case. And we say OK. Right, not the greatest UI that I've ever designed, but it's going to be fit for purpose. And I'll show you the detailed source code in a minute. Let's just start with the basic stuff so we can get to it. Right, now if we go back to the minimum code implementation, you can see what we need here is a global declared variable, right? This one that says xlig, right? And it's a new CumulusGate services license object. Currently it creates it as the global, and it already assigns it, and in the parameters for username and password and app ID it pushes in a bunch of info. We're going to change that a little bit because we would like to actually access that once we click the button, but we do want this as a global object, and I'll explain that in a minute. Let's just first get the rest of the code here. So we also want to create this license object, and that's the object that's going to contain all of the license information, right? So the object license, and I'm going to if we go to user license and we choose go to definition, we can actually see that we've got a couple of functions there: activate trial, close license session, count character, get app dat, blah blah blah. But the most important ones is the object, the user license object. So we can see here that it contains a bunch of properties. So first and foremost is got license. Everything else is information and detail, but the primary one, the most important one, is ultimately, if a lot of these things check out, do we have a current license, yes or no? If the license have expired, or the trial has expired, or any of the conditions that should create, a condition where the license is not valid anymore, would control got license. That's why got license is at the top. This is the most important one. The rest is detail. All right, keep that in mind. So with that in mind, let's see what else we need to do. It says here, very important, when we close the license session, we actually have to close the license object session as well. The reason for that is we are actually pulling a license from the service, and we're opening that license and checking it out to the user, right? So from my form event, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to the events, and I'm going to look for the form closing event, and I'm going to chuck this bit in there and say, if this license is not nothing, then please close the license session. That means it returns it back to the server saying it's not in use anymore, because we have the option to node lock licenses using CumulusGate. That means you cannot access a license using the same credentials from different devices, because then someone can just sell their username and password and then potentially use your software with the same credentials across multiple devices. So we want to prevent that. I mean, CumulusGate is supposed to be a copy protection software, so if we didn't do that, it would be a problem, right? So by pulling that license, we actually assign to the server a unique device ID to it, saying it's already been booked up by this person on this device. And if you try to access it on another device, it will warn the user saying you can't, it's already been checked out. Please return that license first before accessing it again. Which means if we don't return the license after a session, then it will remain checked out. So we always have to have somewhere before we close our form or end our product or whatever, we need to return the license, and that's done by close license session. Now, we don't want to create the new object here at the top. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to actually bring that out. So I'm going to cut that, and I'm going to say here, what we'll do is we'll just say xlig equals, oops, I've already copied the equals, so we don't have to copy again. And I'm just going to say here, we'll chuck that in. And instead of hard coding the name, we want to use the username that we've entered, and we want to use that password that we've entered there as well. So there we go. And then if we just look at the services, the app ID that we need, right? We're going to go back here, and I'm just going to open a new tab to register. And I want that app ID for the new app that we've registered earlier, which was the demo app, and I think it's going to be right here at the bottom. So there's the ID, so bumdem001, and that's the one I want to chuck in here. Now, you'll see with the sample solutions, I've made the app ID a variable that you can actually enter in the dialog. Obviously, that's just for demo purposes. You don't want your clients to have to enter your app ID. That should be something that you've already hard-coded into it, right? It's not going to change. It's static. So just for testing purposes, we want to be able to change it. But for your users, for the end users, you want that to be static. All right, let's run this and see what happens. Now, remember, if you watch the first part of the tutorial, we've assigned a license here to user 3, right, from that admin pool, and we know the password is 123456. So if I click on OK, nothing happens. All right, it's because it's extracting the license data, but I never actually told it to return anything. So not very smart on mine. So let's do that. So we're going to say, all right, we want the object license, and we want to see, has it got a license? And it's going to complain because it's a come on, dot dot to string, because it's a Boolean value, so we want to just change that a little bit, and we just want to add a little bit more meat to this. So we want to say got a license, and let's just end that there with a semicolon. Alright, let's try that again. Now when we run this again and we go user3 at works.nz, and we type in 1234566, it should say yes, we got a license. Boom, great. It doesn't give us any other details, right? It just tells us we've got a license. But we can actually put a breakpoint here, and if I run this one more time, I will be able to show you the properties in the back end. Okay, so let's run that. Now before we get the message, let's just look at this object license. What has actually been returned to it now? And if we look at the properties here, we can say there is a last access, there is a date expires. This will revert to a date with 0001 as the year when it's empty, right? But we can say there's an enterprise created at, there's a date that the enterprise licenses expire, which is in a month. We can say see the last access, right? And we can see here, has it got a license? That very important one, true. Did it have a previous trial? It's set to true, because when you access a license, you can't then have a trial downstream. If you've never had a license or a trial, then the trial would be false, right? Which means if your license expired, then you can't have a trial, because having had a license meant you've already trialed the software, obviously. How many of these enterprise licenses are currently being accessed? 2. How many are in total in the pool? 5. There's a bunch of other stuff here and information that you can go through. You'll see it runs down quite a bit, so there's a lot of info. So we can see the trial definition in days is 7 days. Is it already logged in another device? Is it enterprise license? Yes, it is an enterprise license. Is it expired? No. There's the app code. There is the recycle, the cycle, which is monthly. Here is the unique device node. Here's the enterprise admin, user 1. Here's the enterprise users, user 3 and user 1. Remember, we set that up in the previous exercise with the web platform. So all of that information is visible here, and we can expose that if we want to. So everything is here, right? We don't have to, of course, but we can, and that's what makes it so great. So we can choose how we want this to operate and how we want this to behave. All right, now let's change this a little bit. Let's change that app ID, because I've used the enterprise license as a sample, and I want to change that, and I want to use a single license as a sample to show you just that it's a slightly different setup. And let me keep the breakpoint there, and let's change this to my other demo app, right, which is the one that we use in most examples, and it's available for you to use as well. So it's just called Demo Company Sample App 01, and the product code is SEV-SEA-001. okay, and we're going to use this time using user 1. Okay, so they all have the same password, user1 at bimworks.nz, and the password is always 123456. Okay, and if I click OK, it's going to run through, and let's see what object information we get. So again, we see this time the enterprise, that ent, and everything with an ent is enterprise, right? The ent stuff is empty because it's not an enterprise license. It's a single license, so it's just the normal stuff. So here we can see dates starting to appear now, right? This one is annual, so it expires next year. It's created on the 4th month, 21st day this year. The last access was on the 23rd of the 9th, which is today. And again, all of the other properties we expect to see. This one doesn't have all of the enterprise admin stuff because it's not an enterprise license, but we can see all of the other information. Now, oops, I didn't actually return that one because I just stopped the process, right? So it never got to close the license session, which means even if I don't run it and I try to access this license from another machine, it should actually tell me that it's currently checked out, and we can test that. Let me show you. So there's a JavaScript library section, right? And if you click on it, it'll take you to the JavaScript samples, and it's using that same one as an example. If I choose get license info, it will pull the license info for me on it's the same machine, so that's why it's not complaining. So my device node is the same. I have to use another device with a different ID, then it will tell me, hey, this is already in use on another machine, you can't access it again, you know. But anyway, so let's try that again, but this time I want to show you something. So if I go user1 at bimworks.nz, but I entered the wrong password, so instead of 123456, I'm going to delete the last character, so it's the wrong password. The server is strong enough and it'll tell me the password entered is incorrect, right? So it knows it knows what happens, and it's going to tell me also then no license has been returned, so it's false. Let's fix the password, but let's change the email address to something that's incorrect. Again, no account found with that username, and if we continue this, it's going to say, in other words, you didn't get a license, sorry, try again. So it checks for those conditions as well, and I did it again. I didn't check in the license, so let me just fix that. Z, and let's put in the correct password here, and when I'm done this time, I'm going to let it run through and close it properly instead of hitting the stop button, because I want that form closing event to trigger the close license session information. You'll actually see when we run the JavaScript sample, it gives you a bunch of information. Can you see it's got a logged node? There it is, right? That's the logged node, right? And that will be the same one that we got from the .NET app. And you'll see if I click here on return license, that actually gets cleared. You see, the log node is now empty. So that return license and this return license or close license session does the same thing. It clears that information for us. Okay, that is the quick start. I'm going to take a pause, and then we're going to head and jump into the detailed source code using the samples that we can find here from the welcome page downloads area.